resources and the consequent inadequacy for life. That means it is to believe wholeheartedly. It is not to believe. The final way is to believe that there is in God strength and resources sufficient for our needs. It is the belief in life. It is trusting life. It is trusting God. It's trusting the cosmos, that there is a strength, there's an understanding. As King has often said, the arc of justice is long, but it bends toward the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. An example of overcoming this fear, 1959, Guy Carawan, who became director of the music department at the Highlander Center, reintroduced a song that had already been introduced at Highlander. The song was "We Shall Overcome." And this was introduced to the student activists there. It was they who gave the song the words and rhythm for which it's currently known. When they sang it to keep their spirits up during the frightening police raids on Highlander and the subsequent days in jail, what happened was they were at the Highlander Center and the place was raided by police or Ku Klux Klan folks, the same. And while being intimidated by these authorities, there rose in them these words: "We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday." Because they were so tuned in to building this community, this beloved community, the search for common ground, they were willing to give their lives. They had overcome the fear of death. They had overcome the fear of losing whatever positions they might have had in school for this greater vision of what kind of world had to come into being. So that we are not afraid today. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Certainly, Martin Luther King dedicated himself also to this vision of beloved community. What is beloved community? Well, at Fellowship Church, we had a class on the beloved community in our engaged spirituality sessions. And let me just pull one of the quotes out about beloved community. This is what one person said: "The beloved community is one in which its members have had extensive and ongoing experience of seeing themselves in their neighbors, honoring their full humanity and striving to grow together. Fundamental aspects of this are full equality among men and women and people of all genders, that the places we inhabit are safe and comfortable, and difference and conflict are not feared, but created as opportunities to grasp one tiny sliver of the wholeness of creation, and in that, maybe God too." When King arrived in Memphis the night before he was assassinated, he said that it's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day God's preachers must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, the new Memphis, Tennessee. This is what we've got to do, he was saying. He's talking about, again, this community that must come into being, this new reality, this new era, this new nation that must be born. He said, then I got into Memphis and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter to me because I've seen the mountain. I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like everybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And God's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. Here, listen to this. I'm not worried about anything. Listen to this. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And I think maybe we have to get rid of our fear in order to see the glory of the coming of the Lord. I'm not sure we can see that glory or experience that glory if we're afraid of life, if we're afraid of engaging with one another, if we're afraid of building this new community, this beloved community. King talked about the fact that we had inherited a world house, which again with him is considered a beloved community. We have inherited a world house. A large house, he said, a great world house in which we have to live together. Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. Part of King's own development as a national leader, a movement leader, was due to the leadership of a Hindu, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the Mahatma. King informs us, although there may have been political and strategic reasons that Gandhi pursued a nonviolent campaign, I believe the ultimate motivation came from his inherent Hindu faith. The Sanskrit word for nonviolence is ahimsa. In his autobiography, Gandhi states, part of the issue is that our religions, our faith traditions are seen as ends rather than means. I want to repeat that. Part of the issue is that our religions, our faith traditions are seen as ends rather than means. They become absolute and therefore barriers to people who are not part of that religious or faith tradition, rather than seeing them as means, as paths, as ways to try to understand the relationship of the self to the divine, the all-pervading presence, the more than, to the universe, the cosmos. Means rather than ends. And if they're seen as means, then we can come together with our different means and not try to absolutize any above the other. In a similar vein, Dr. Thurman wrote, what is true in religion is true because it is true. It is not true because it is in that religion. It's true because it's true. It's not true because it's in that religion. Therefore, it is what is true that is essential, not the religion or faith tradition that houses it. It is the search for truth. King was not merely talking about superficial interfaith gatherings, but he was concerned about something much deeper and larger. He was concerned about life longing for itself. He was concerned about the inextricably bound nature of who we are as human beings. He was concerned about excavating the more than and who and what we are and emerging and resting with the all-pervading presence. King was concerned that we understand our interrelationship, our connectedness to each other, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we must build a community where there is no longer injustice, a community of compassion, of love. He was concerned about the interfaith walk together toward a promised land of freedom and justice, beloved community. Finally, he said, let us imagine that community, where love has destroyed separation, fear, deceit, and hatred, where no one goes hungry and without proper medical care, where educational opportunities are given equally with the learning that creates unlimited experiences. Imagine a place where the universal spirit is invited to provide economic equality, peace, justice, and love. And he says, if we each can see this clearly and do it, then we can say that we created the beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Blake, for that very, very powerful lesson and words that mixed not only the idea of beloved community that Dr. King, Dr. Thurman, taking from, taking a lead from a lot of their learning and teaching and interaction, particularly with Mohandas K. Gandhi and the like, regarding the meaning of beloved community and the wholeness of it. And then thank you again for talking about your own history in a segregated environment not too long ago, relative to these are very interesting times that we live in today, but not too long ago, this happened in your life. I was in grade school when this happened in your life.
Yes.
So what I want to ask first is this. This idea of beloved community is a wholesome community, and I heard you speak a bit about the push and pull in today's environment, where the thing that's on the news today is war and conflict in our space, and that it's not just a single side of a coin, but there are things that occur that impact all of us. I'd like for you to sort of unpack just the theoretical idea of that the beloved community and justice, what that means, and the idea of fear in that space. Unpack that a little theoretically for us briefly here. And then I want to talk to you about a little more about your own biography in that space.
First of all, I forgot to say at the very beginning how honored I am to be with you tonight, and how honored I am to have a relationship with you. You are an extraordinary person, a prophet during our time. And not only a person with vision, but a person who has the ability to make our visions real. I had thought about doing something like this years ago, but was never able to put it together. So thank you very much for your extreme leadership, extremely powerful and potent leadership in our community. It is just an honor to be related to you in any kind of way because of the just amazing work that you do. It's quite amazing. In terms of some of the things you talked about, the war issue, let me put it this way. I don't want to, well, maybe I'll do that when we come to the second part, when you talk about own personal biography. Yes, we are talking, when we talk about King, we're talking about a sense of wholeness, a sense of integrity of relationship. We're talking about again, some of the issues that are at the basis of some of the problems in the world. For example, in 1967, it started in 66, but in 1967, I believe, Dr. King, Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, and others presented concretely what we could look at in terms of beloved community or what nations should do. And that is they presented a freedom budget for the United States. And that freedom budget included free education, healthcare. It included the fact that everyone should have an income or full access to work, those kinds of issues. And on a personal level, on an institutional level, you don't have crime, the level of crime and the distress in communities when they have jobs, when they are being fulfilled, when individuals seem to be in control of their lives. So on one level, that is very important for us to stand in terms of his understanding of what is possible. That's also true internationally. And we also have to find places of security. Again, I want to say, I don't want to be misunderstood. What the Russians are doing is absolutely awful, okay, the Ukrainian. And yet, although they were the enemy, attempts were not made when Putin was trying to say, I'm concerned about our security. You know, the United Nations keeps coming closer and closer with military, blah, 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 and so on. We had agreed that NATO wouldn't do that. And yet you keep doing that, and then we are afraid that if you come into Ukraine, you're going to be right on our borders. So my point is, that was their fear, and of course the fear from the West and so on is we're seeing that the Russia coming toward the West. So of course, but there were opportunities to talk. Turns a beloved international reality. John Kennedy, remember the Cuban? You were too young. The Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, when we have put in Europe near the Russian border, and Russia put nuclear missiles in Cuba. But what happened was that John Kennedy did not then say, okay, let's go and charge against Cuba or blow up, have war against Cuba or whatever. He and Nikita Khrushchev, who were enemies in a sense, realized that we have got to learn somehow to live together. We don't like each other necessarily, but how can we live together to avoid this kind of catastrophe? That, in a sense, is not beloved community, but it's a step toward understanding our commonality and the fact that we are intertwined. That did not happen with this. You know, the efforts were basically just dismissed in terms of what the Russians were trying to say. Again, that's not justifying this because I'm totally opposed to war, period. I don't care who, I'm opposed to war. I'm opposed to violence, period. But the wholesomeness can only, as you talk, the wholesomeness can only come through when, what I was going to say for later, the church, for example, the Church for All Peoples, for the Fellowship of All Peoples, where there is really respect for all peoples, where we can somehow come together at times and enjoy each other, have fellowship, have understanding, and see what is common. What do we hold dear that is common, our sense of common ground? Because if we do that, we'll find that the barriers that we live under are not nearly as significant or as powerful as our sense of common ground. Mm. I'm not sure I answered the question.
No, you did. That's very helpful. In your own personal experience, you talked about during your message that the experience at the University of Alabama, in have just the one instance in going to a church and being turned away in such an insidious manner. Is that so?
Yes.
That's still alive today.
Yes.
I'm sure, and it's getting and it's getting more insidious and more
Yes.
forward. I
And
could say today.
one of the things I did not share had to do with my own feelings. When we're talking about king and fear, it was one of the times when I did develop fear. I was very bold. If I was a PSR, everybody, he's the militant and blah, 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 and take on this and take on that and so on. But what happened was after the incident, people in the community knew about it. Actually, there was some international coverage of it. A friend of mine lived in Germany and told me, but what happened when I got home, I received a call from one of my ministerial colleagues who asked me, man, I have an extra pistol. You want me to bring it over so you can have something to protect yourself? And so I'm going, I hadn't even thought of it. And I was saying to myself, well, what would I do with a pistol? I'd probably end up shooting myself. I don't know how to handle those kinds of things. One of my students called and said, I know you live by yourself. You want me to come over and stay with you for a while because of, oh my God. We found out that the church was one of the headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. People
the
called,
church that you visited was one of the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes. What happened was people called me and said to be sure to check your gas tank before you take off. You know, people can put sand and stuff in it. And so I had never even thought of any of these kinds of things. I really hadn't, that these kinds of things would happen. But once they happened, I was fearful of what could possibly happen. Now, that was with that one incident. But think again about how that was part of the ethos of that community of the South. Every day your life could be taken for no reason, for walking on the sidewalk, for looking at a white person in the eye, for not looking at a white person in the eye, for all kinds of things. And that is the extraordinary life of King. King helped to bring people together. He was the catalyst to say, we shall overcome. We're not going to ride those buses. We don't care what happens to our jobs. The ministers, if our churches are bombed, even with the white folks, there are white ministers who lost their jobs in so many different places. That's how they stand for integration. And the ones that I know of said they were glad they took the stand. They would do it again if necessary. But this is the kind of fear. You can lose your job. They can kill somebody in your family. You know, look at Emmett Till. What happened to him for just supposedly whistling at a white woman who has then recanted her testimony? It was that kind of fear. And for King to move into that situation and to have people boldly in daylight marching down the streets, saying we shall go, or boycott, or doing whatever they needed to do. It was an inspiration to the cab drivers when the people could not again ride the buses. How do people get to work? Many won't. But the cab driver said, we'll take them. We won't charge them except what they charge in the bus. So then they clamped down on that. And because the authorities said, no, you can't do that. That's a violation. Okay. The churches come together and say, who's got a car? Who's got cars? We put together a carpool. We are not, these are people who were afraid, who had been afraid, who had gone along with segregation so long. And now they are rising up boldly and saying, we will no longer be afraid. We're not going to take this any longer. And even if I have to die on the road to freedom, to justice, so be it.
So this overcoming of fear was an overcoming of a concrete fear.
Yes. Yes.
Not a theoretical fear.
Yeah.
This was a physical and psychological struggle to overcome.
And the reason I tried to do that was because in King's Antidote for Fear, he does talk about all kinds of fears, blah, 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 anxiety. And I did not want to go there because it's true, there are all kinds of fears. But I just wanted to emphasize more the fears that come out of movements for social justice, that come out of injustice, of that kind of thing. Yes, these are concrete things that happen. People every day. And even now, maybe people are afraid to speak up in groups, to say certain things. Professors afraid they might get a bad grade. There was a group of students who used to meet at a certain institution, Black students, to deal with racism. And when I talked with the administrators, we had a meeting once, they said, oh, how wonderful these sessions are going on racism, with racism. How they're really going well, and the students seem to be really enjoying the Black students, students of color. I said, they're not going well, and the students are not enjoying it. I said, you know how I know? It was after they leave your meeting, they come to my office and tell me how awful the sessions were. But the problem is they're so happy, I guess, or concerned that at least some effort is being made by the white folks here, that they don't want to offend the white folks by really saying, this is the way things are. I've seen it happening in interfaith groups, where the groups who are not, people who are not Christians, often mute themselves because they don't want to offend the Christians who are now at least trying to open up things so we can have people from various faith traditions there. But it's basically Christian-centric, and quite often the Christians are in control and the others see themselves as guests. So they don't want to offend the guests by saying some of the things I just said. Christianity is responsible for a whole lot of wars in the world, a lot of overthrowing of governments. So it's not just reading, for example, it's not just reading from the sacred text. I mean, that's nice for me to hear what's in the Quran or something else, but it's very different when I'm saying that, the people in Iraq were basically primarily Muslim, and there was no outcry, very little outcry when we moved into Iraq on a false pretense of nuclear weapons. And then the president later joked about it. Oh, let me see if I can find some nuclear weapons. And yes, I can see any. There are hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq who were slain, but they were Muslim. I don't want to get into the whole thing of Israeli and Palestinian, but you know, it's there.
Those are there. Let me move to some of our guests here who have come to participate. If you have any questions for Dr. Blake in this area of fear and the beloved community, there's so much we can sort of mine here as we sort of move through. One of the things that's interesting to me is how you wove Dr. Thurman, you know, one of King's mentors, Dr. Thurman's idea of fear into the discussion. And you know, you knew Howard Thurman, and you knew him very in a way that many of us just would never know. How did he talk to us a little more as we move on here? Talk to us a little more about how he thought about this idea of fear. You touched on it a bit. What was that something that he wrestled with?
Yes, he did. He wrestled with fear, and he also wrestled with the fact that the search for common ground, as he would put it, would overcome the fear. That's why he was very insistent with the church that people gather together, but he said for a significant time duration. It just can't be done, just come to a service and whatever, but is over a sufficient time duration and have great spiritual gatherings. Then there will emerge among the people a sense of common ground, which would undercut all the barriers by which we live. But Thurman also honestly believed in that common ground. He honestly believed that we were each other's brothers and sisters. So when I was with him and I would sit with him, and there are times when I was saying, you know, this white black thing is just not going to hate. I mean, you know, they're beyond redemption. You know, when he talked, you knew that he did not agree with that at all. that there was, that we were in fact sisters and brothers, and that there was some integrity. If we cannot find what he called the scent within the other, something is wrong within those. You have to keep struggling because it's there. The oneness is there. The hunger of the heart is there. The relationship is there. So you have to keep struggling to find it. And that is our responsibility. And it can be found. Thus, it can be found if we will commit ourselves to finding them. So he really believed that we could overcome the fear. Because, well, built in into the creative reality is relationship with all of creation. And the people in creation are part of that creation, part of the relationship. And that I cannot, King says it too, I cannot be me unless you can be you. He says, I've always been trying to find out the me without in some way offending or destroying the you. And I need to come up when I go deep down within myself, beyond race, beyond class, I come up inside of every other human being. So every person is the revelation of God. It's God trying to come into God's self. We're all that. We're all these images of God trying to come into God's larger self. All of us, It's just, I think that some of us have really been, well, all of us, struggle with this. But, and by that, I don't mean necessarily that Thurman thought or strived to get everybody, every white person to come along to common ground. I don't think that, because you don't have enough time to get everybody. But his pronouncements, his sermons were all based on the belief that this is possible for a common ground to exist. And that's why he and Mrs. Sermon, especially Mrs. Sermon, had all these dolls from various places, international dolls, to help people understand the cultures of the different peoples of the world. So they would come to Fellowship Church, they would dress in the dress of their communities. There were dolls that have food from their country. And this was a way for young people and other people to move into a greater understanding of the variety, the diversity of experiences in the world, of customs, of people, and yet the common ground that existed among all peoples. That was Mrs. Thurman.
Very important, very important. I want to thank you for your very important and vital offering and message to us this evening about this idea of fear and the beloved community and the connection with that, the concreteness of fear, and what it means in everyday life for people, and how it translates in the relationship between people, between peoples, between nations, and how we sort of interact with each other, and how that idea of fear and how this very concrete notion of fear can cloud and occlude relationship in such a way that it sort of blocks our ability to think about each other in human terms.
It entombs our real selves. Okay, we cannot be who we need to be if we're fearful. If fear is going on, we can't. It's just impossible. And that's important for us to understand. We can't. So the people who are freest are the people like Dr. King, who finally said, you can't get freer than that. Or if you look historically, a person like Jesus who says, then I give my life to God, to the reality, to the movement. And that's total freedom.
Yes. Dr. Virginia Marshall's with us, and she has a question. Dr. Marshall.
Thank you so much. This has been another great session for us to think about and to ponder and to reflect. And thank you, Dr. Blake And Reverend Aaron, I'm so appreciative to you. I was actually talking about fear and how the white men, the Christian men, treated us. I just thought back to last week's Supreme Court Justice hearing, how those
Yes,
white senators from the southern states treated the judge, and they still do not see us as human, and they
right.
never will. So to me, that was just, and then fear. Think about those children who led the boycott for us, the marches, the little kids, the children under 10 years old. I was talking about those 4 little girls who was killed in the church in
Yes.
Alabama. And so fear, that when we're in the movement, we don't think about the fear, we think about the movement. But my main point is that white men still do not see our men, our Black men, as human. They do not see us women as human. And when they were going to rape the women during slavery time, they would say, well, my wife is so delicate and all that. But then they were going to rape the housekeeper and have
Yeah.
these illegitimate children by the housekeeper and beat and hang our men. So they still do not see us. And I don't think they ever will. What do you think?
You got a very, very important point.
Thanks, Doc.
And that's why, Dr. Marshall, it's so important for us and for others to form alternative communities. Because we're going to constantly have this. You look at, yes, we finally got the Emmett Till pass. It looks like we're going to have the confirmation as the Supreme Court justice. But yet there's still so much that is wrong. And yet, what was King doing with this movement? He was creating an alternative community. Aaron Griselle, you might remember when Dr. Charles Long spoke at our Martin Luther King, Howard Thurman homilies some years ago, and then he went to Grace Cathedral. And
Right.
Someone asked him, then what should we do? How do we go forward? And he said, form intentional communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because that's how the Christian church started. It was an alternative. It did not necessarily try to convince the Roman folks to let them in. Okay, integrate, to give them position in the military or Secretary of State, whatever. He said, no, we have the resources ourselves because we have the resource of God. We can create an alternative reality ourselves. So we don't have to deal with this fear thing. Our lives don't need to be all the time responding to fear. We can develop ourselves the kind of the beloved community, the kingdom, K-I-N, or I say dumb, of God. We can do that ourselves. We can provide economically for each other. If you got a lot of money, you got to come, bring it to us. Let's divide it among people. Okay? It is that kind of reality that I think we need to move toward, because as you're saying, Dr. Marshall, there will, I think, always be people in power who will not concede that we are human beings. I even see the difference of treatment between, and again, I'm not knocking this, the refugees coming from Ukraine and the little bit darker people in Afghanistan, not to mention Haitians, not to mention the people from the southern border who've been trying to get in this country, trying to escape oppression. Yeah. Oppression in many places that result from our actions in those countries. So it's important for us to fear, but also to move beyond fear and use our own. That's what I love about Aaron Griselle, one of the things, creating different forums for us, different platforms, different thinking, ways for us to come together and imagine. That's the great gift of the universe, imagination. To imagine what is possible, what could be, if we get beyond, or even the fear of having to cling to institutions and structures of the past. Like Victor Hugo says, we talk about a new creation of tomorrow, but we built it on the insecurities of yesteryear. We think they're secure, but they're not. The thing, jobs are not secure. I know because I've lost a couple of, just this kind of thing. But yeah, I think that the fear, there is built into many whites still the understanding of superiority. And white superiority is still, very much in not only in vogue, but in reality. But that comes out of the fear that they know they are not superior, the fear of not being superior.
Thurman talks about that very clearly.
Yes.
Thurman talks about that, and was it Hemingway who wrote in the New York Times back in 1961 about?
It was Steinbeck.
It was John Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck,
who wrote that
yes.
In the New York Times, 1961, and in 1965, that 3 days after the march, the third march, or the final from Selma to Montgomery, King was in the pulpit in the installation service during that week, March 28th, at Grace Cathedral, and he said the same thing. He said this idea of racism, this white supremacy, is at that time he said it's the Negro's burden and America's shame.
Yes.
It is a shame.
Shame.
And it is still that idea of shame that long puts it. It's the refusal to come to terms with the soul,
yes.
of America. It's the between the line, where the soul of this nation is, and that soul is imbued with the culture and with ideas of justice and beloved community that is required for a successful democracy to succeed. And we are rapidly getting to that point to where the confrontation between the soul of a nation and the determined push against the soul of a nation is coming to a head. And that is going to have to be confronted. I want to thank my wonderful friend and another mentor, my doctor, the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Odell Blake, for enlivening us today. We always, except for the clock, we always have these wonderful discussions. Before we go, I want to redo one thing. As we leave, I want to just inform people about what will be going on in these next weeks as we work out again this 5-week virtual series, and then as we enter into Holy Week and into Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, and the like in the Christian calendar. Want to again thank our partners who invited us to actually think this thing through. The Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, this as part of their 28th Lenten Tabernacle in San Francisco, California, led by the beloved Bishop Dr. Donald E. Green, the chairman of the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, and my great, wonderful, and abiding friend. And again, you all just helped to guide me along the way. The Reverend Dr. James McCrae Jr., who is the executive director of TCDC, and all who make up the family of TCDC and the Tabernacle congregations, Dr. Virginia Marshall and the Missionary Temple CME family, and and Brian Caston, the chair of the board there at the wonderful Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples, our wonderful congregation. And good to see you again, Susan, and all of you who are with us. Now, next week is our final virtual seminar in this series, King and Fear. And in that series on April 7th, 7 p.m., our own friend, the Dr. Dwight Nathaniel Hopkins, the Alexander Campbell Professor at the University of Chicago, and now the leading thinker in Black liberation theology, his mentor, the late Dr. James Hal Cone. We will be talking about fear and the cross and the lynching tree. Fear, the cross and the lynching tree, the eponymous title of Dr. Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. So Dr. Hopkins will be our lead speaker next Thursday, 7 p.m. You will be able to find all of that information if you go to the events page at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. And if you feel so led, this organization was founded by Dr. Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, to serve as the official organization to celebrate Dr. King's federal holiday that was enacted on November 2nd, 1983, to begin the third Monday in January 1986. So she came here in 1985 to start this organization under the leadership of our beloved Reverend Cecil Williams. And since 2010, we have been very privileged to take the helm here and to move this program forward. But we can only do that with you, our friends. These events, and as many as we can, these events are free and open to the public. So if you are so led, please consider donating to the NorcalMLK Foundation. You can find that information by pressing the donate button at NorcalMLKFoundation.org and giving what you desire and can as we go forward here. So thank you so much. Before we leave, I want to replay Dr. King's favorite song. I'm going to share the screen here, and after we replay that song, we will close. Here we are with Take My Hand, Precious Lord by Don Shirley. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next week back here. You want to check our MLK, NorCal MLK Foundation page for next week's links. We will again shoot them out to you, but we look forward to seeing you again here Thursday, 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. You can register on to be a part of the Zoom session, or you will be able to watch it on our YouTube channel. Thank you again, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week.